Ruth, we think it's best if you skip Christmas dinner at our house this year. The dining room will be at capacity, and honestly, your hearing problems make conversation awkward for everyone. Those words from Charlotte, my daughter-in-law, cut deeper than the sharpest knife, but they ignited a flame inside me I thought had been extinguished years ago. That painful rejection became the catalyst for the most meaningful holiday celebration I've experienced in 20 years. Before we continue, let me know where you're watching from in the comments. And if this story touches your heart, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've got something extraordinary to share with you. They say blood makes you related, but love makes you family. This is the story of how I reclaimed my Christmas, rediscovered my voice, and realized that at 70 years old, I wasn't just Victor's mother, Lily and Noah's grandmother, or Thomas's widow. I was Ruth Wilson, and I still had gifts worth sharing. Was born Ruth Ann Kavanaugh in the spring of 1955 in a small town called Pinewood that few people could locate on a map. My father owned the local pharmacy, and my mother taught piano from our sunroom. We weren't wealthy by conventional standards, but we were rich in the ways that truly mattered. A home filled with music and stories, hands that were always ready to help, and a table that welcomed anyone who needed a place to belong. The measure of a life well lived isn't in what you have, Ruthie, but in what you give, my mother would say as we prepared meals together, flour dusting her apron and wisdom shining in her eyes. I learned early that creating spaces where people felt valued was its own kind of art, as legitimate and beautiful as any painting hanging in a gallery. I met Thomas Wilson during my first year teaching elementary school. He was the new pediatrician in town, tall and thoughtful with eyes that crinkled at the corners when he smiled. We quite literally bumped into each other at the library. I was carrying a stack of picture books for my second graders, and he was returning medical journals. The collision sent books tumbling across the polished floor, and as we scrambled to gather them, our hands touched over the Velveteen Rabbit. "I'm so sorry," he said, his voice gentle despite his imposing height. Those kind eyes studied me with such warmth that I felt my cheeks flush. "I'm Thomas." "Ruth," I replied, suddenly aware of my sensible shoes and the chalk dust likely clinging to my cardigan. "But everyone calls me Ruthie." That chance meeting blossomed into cups of tea at the corner cafe, walks through autumn leaves, and eventually a simple solitaire diamond that Thomas had saved 3 months to afford. "It's not very grand," he apologized as he slipped it onto my finger. "But one day I promise you'll have everything you deserve." I looked into those earnest eyes and knew with absolute certainty that I already had everything I could ever want. We married in the summer of 1977 in my parents' garden. My mother strung fairy lights through the old maple tree, and my father built a simple wooden arch where we exchanged our vows. My wedding dress was ivory lace that had been my grandmother's, carefully altered to suit my shorter frame. Thomas wore a navy suit he'd bought for his medical school graduation, a spring of baby's breath in his lapel. We started our life together in a modest apartment near the elementary school where I taught and the clinic where Thomas worked. Our furniture was mostly secondhand. A wobbly dining table my father had reinforced, a sofa with slightly worn armrests from Thomas's aunt, mismatched chairs we'd painted the same shade of blue to create some harmony. Those early years were lean, but joyful. We saved diligently, cooking simple meals at home and finding happiness in free pleasures. Walks in the town park, board games by lamplight when we were conserving electricity, Sunday afternoon picnics by the river, when others our age were buying new cars or taking vacations to exotic destinations. We put every extra dollar into our dream, a home of our own where we could raise a family and build a legacy of love and acceptance. In 1980, we welcomed Victor into the world. I can still recall the weight of him in my arms, so impossibly small, yet somehow containing the entire universe. Thomas stood beside the hospital bed, tears streaming unashamedly down his face. "Look what we made, Ruthie," he whispered, voice thick with emotion. "Look at our son." Victor had Thomas's dark curls and my stubborn chin. From his earliest days, he showed a determination that both delighted and exhausted us. When he learned to walk, he refused any helping hand, tumbling again and again onto our carpeted floor, only to push himself back up with renewed purpose. When he learned to read, he insisted on finishing entire books in one sitting, even as his small eyelids grew heavy with sleep. "He's going to make a mark on this world," Thomas would say proudly, watching Victor meticulously organize his toy cars or carefully count the coins in his ceramic piggy bank. "Our boy is going places." By the time Victor started school, Thomas's medical practice had flourished enough for us to make a down payment on a Victorian house on Cedar Lane. It wasn't perfect. The kitchen needed updating, the plumbing was temperamental, and the garden had grown wild with neglect. But to us, it was a palace. I planted rose bushes along the front walkway and hung curtains I'd sewn myself in every window. Thomas spent weekends replacing floorboards and painting walls, whistling as he worked. We filled that house with love, with dreams, with the noise, and beautiful chaos of family life. I continued teaching second grade at Pinewood Elementary, just a few blocks from our home. The salary wasn't impressive, but the hours meant I could be present when Victor returned from school, and the summer breaks allowed precious time together as a family. Thomas built his pediatric practice, becoming beloved by families throughout our community for his gentle manner and thorough care. We weren't wealthy, but we were comfortable. We had health insurance, a reliable station wagon, and enough extra to start a college fund for Victor. Every summer, we took a modest vacation, a week at a lakeside cabin, camping in the state park, and once, after saving for 3 years, a magical trip to Disney World. Victor would bounce with excitement for weeks beforehand, helping to pack the car and tracing our route on the road atlas with a highlighter pen. As Victor grew, I watched, with a mixture of pride and wistfulness as he developed his own identity, separate from ours. The little boy who once followed Thomas around the yard with a toy stethoscope, mimicking his every move, became a teenager with opinions and interests all his own. He joined the debate team in high school, discovered a passion for constitutional law, and set his sights on prestigious pre-law programs. Just like his mother, I'd say to Thomas, watching Victor articulate his arguments at the kitchen table. Thomas would shake his head, smiling. More ambitious, though. He won't stop at teaching or a small-town practice. He's got bigger plans. There was no bitterness in Thomas's voice, only pride and a deep, abiding hope that his son would have opportunities beyond what we had known. Thomas had sacrificed his dream of a specialized medical career to establish his practice in our small town, ensuring stability for our family. He never spoke of it as a loss, but I knew it was one of his few regrets. When Victor was accepted to Westlake University with a partial scholarship, Thomas and I embraced each other and cried after Victor went to bed. The scholarship would help, but we still faced 4 years of tuition payments that would strain our resources considerably. Without hesitation, Thomas took on additional patients and extended his office hours. I started tutoring after school and selling hand-knitted items at the local craft fair. "We'll manage," Thomas assured me when I fretted over our thinning savings. "This is what we've worked for all these years." And we did manage, though it meant postponing home repairs, cutting back on everything non-essential, and working more hours than our bodies sometimes wanted to give. The day we drove Victor to college, helping him unpack in a dormitory room that seemed impossibly small for our tall, lanky son, I felt a complex mixture of emotions, pride and fear and loss, and hope all tangled together in my heart. "Call us. Anytime," I told him, straightening his bedspread for the 3rd time. "Day or night. And come home whenever you can." "I will, Mom," he promised, though I could see his eyes were already looking beyond us toward the new life waiting just outside. The door. Thomas squeezed my hand as we walked back to the car. "He'll be fine, Ruthie. We raised him right." Victor thrived at Westlake. His natural eloquence and analytical mind opened doors to internships, leadership positions in campus organizations, and a circle of friends from affluent, well-connected families. When he came home for holidays, he spoke a new language of case law, constitutional amendments, and judicial precedents. His clothes became more expensive, his tastes more refined, his stories filled with names and places that seemed to belong to a world I could barely imagine. It was during his senior year that he brought Charlotte home for Christmas. She was striking, tall and slender, with sleek auburn hair and clothes that looked like they belonged in a magazine. She studied international business, spoke fluent French, and had spent a semester abroad in Paris. Her father was a federal judge. In Boston, her mother a curator at the Museum of Fine Arts. Next to her, I felt suddenly conscious of my practical boots and the laugh lines around my eyes that had deepened since Thomas's health had begun to decline. "Your home is so charming," she said, looking around our living room with its comfortable but worn furniture, the family photos on every surface, the hand-crocheted throws draped over the sofa. "It's like stepping into a Norman Rockwell painting." I wasn't sure if it was a compliment, but I chose to take it as one. "Thomas and I believe a home should be lived in, not just looked at," I replied, offering her more cranberry chutney. "Charlotte's family just renovated their Cape Cod summer house," Victor said quickly. "It was featured in Architectural Digest." "How lovely," I said, though I'd never heard of the magazine. "I'd love to see photos sometime." Throughout the meal, I watched my son, the way he looked at Charlotte, the way he seemed to hang on her every word, the way he subtly corrected his grammar and table manners in her presence. It wasn't that I disliked her. She was polite, intelligent, clearly ambitious. But I couldn't help feeling that when Victor looked at her, he saw a future that had no place for his past. After they left, Thomas found me in the kitchen washing dishes with more vigor than necessary. "She seems nice," he offered, picking up a dish towel. "She's perfect," I said, scrubbing at a stubborn spot on the roasting pan. "Beautiful, educated, sophisticated. Everything I'm not." Thomas set down the towel and turned me to face him, his hands gentle on my shoulders. "Ruth Wilson, you stop that right now. You are the most beautiful, intelligent, loving woman I've ever known. If our son is lucky, Charlotte will have half your character." I leaned into his solid warmth, grateful beyond words for this man who had stood beside me for so many years, who still looked at me as if I were the young teacher he'd met in the library, even as time etched its marks on both our faces. Victor and Charlotte married 2 years later in a lavish ceremony at an historic mansion that Charlotte's parents rented for the occasion. The guest list included partners from Victor's law firm, Charlotte's sorority sisters, and various connections from both their professional networks. Thomas and I sat in the front row, feeling somewhat out of place amid the designer suits and cocktail dresses. "Just smile and be yourself," Thomas whispered, adjusting his tie for the dozenth time. "We are the parents of the groom. We have every right to be here." The ceremony was beautiful, but impersonal, with none of the warmth or character that had marked our garden wedding all those years ago. I missed the personal touches, the sense of family and community, but Victor looked happy, and in the end, that was all that mattered. As the years passed, Victor and Charlotte built their life together, climbing steadily upward in both their careers. They bought a modern condominium in the downtown area, then upgraded to a larger home in an exclusive neighborhood when Victor made junior partner at his firm. They traveled extensively, ski trips to Aspen, anniversaries in Barcelona, business, conferences in Singapore. I followed their lives with interest and pride, though increasingly from a distance. Our phone calls grew shorter and less frequent. Visits became annual events rather than regular occurrences. When they did come to see us, it was often a brief stopover on the way to somewhere else, conversations punctuated by the chiming of cell phones and glances at watches. "They're busy, Ruthie," Thomas would remind me when I expressed hurt at a missed visit or forgotten birthday. Building careers takes time and focus. Remember how hard we worked at their age? We always made time for family, I would counter, but I tried not to dwell on it. After all, wasn't this what we'd wanted for Victor? Success, security, opportunities beyond what we could have provided? In 2018, they welcomed their first child, a daughter they named Lily. I knitted her a soft yellow blanket and matching booties, spending hours ensuring every stitch was perfect. When we visited the hospital, Charlotte looked remarkably composed for someone who had just given birth. Her hair arranged artfully on the pillow, a silk robe replacing the standard hospital gown. "Would you like to hold her?" Victor asked carefully, transferring the tiny bundle into my arms. The moment I looked into Lily's face, so small, so perfect, with Thomas's dimple already visible in her cheek, all my accumulated disappointments melted away. Here was a fresh start, a new chapter, a chance to rebuild the connections that had frayed over time. 2 years later, they had a son, Noah. Our grandchildren became the center of our world. I made photo albums documenting their growth, saved for special gifts, planned outings and activities for when they visited. Thomas built a treehouse in our backyard and stocked up on toys and books to keep at our house. For a few golden years, it felt like we had reclaimed something precious. Victor and Charlotte were too busy with their careers to manage all the demands of parenthood without help, so they welcomed our involvement. I picked up Lily from preschool 3 days a week. Thomas taught Noah to identify different birds in our garden during school breaks. The children would stay with us, filling our home once again with laughter and sticky fingerprints and the wonderful chaos of young lives. Then came the winter of 2020, and with it, the diagnosis that would change everything. Thomas had been feeling tired for months, brushing off my concerns with reassurances about work stress and age catching up with him. When he finally agreed to see a doctor, the news was devastating. Stage 4 pancreatic cancer that had already spread to his liver. The prognosis was 6 months, perhaps a year with aggressive treatment. "It's not fair," I wept in Victor's arms when we called to tell him. "We were supposed to have more time." "We'll get through this, Mom," he promised, his voice steady though. I could hear the fear beneath it. "The firm has excellent medical insurance. We'll find the best specialists, explore every treatment option." True to his word, Victor arranged consultations with top oncologists, researched clinical trials, even investigated experimental treatments in Germany. For a few months, I allowed myself to hope, but Thomas's decline was swift and merciless. The chemotherapy ravaged his once strong body, leaving him frail and exhausted. The pain medications fogged his sharp mind. Through it all, he remained my Thomas, gentle, thoughtful, more concerned with my welfare than his own. "Promise me you'll still find joy, Ruthie," he made me swear one night, his hand gripping mine, with surprising strength. "Promise me you won't stop living when I'm gone." I made the promise, though I couldn't imagine how I would keep it. Thomas passed away on a quiet Sunday morning in April 2020, with me beside him holding his hand. He slipped away peacefully, the weight of suffering finally lifted from his shoulders. I felt his absence like a physical thing, a hollow space in the bed beside me, an echo in rooms that had once rung with his laughter, a shadow where his substance should have been. The world was already changing then, with the pandemic forcing everyone into isolation. My grief unfolded in a strange limbo, without the usual rituals and gatherings that might have provided some comfort. The funeral was small, socially distanced, nothing like the celebration of life that Thomas deserved. Victor flew in for 3 days, staying at a hotel rather than at the house, citing concerns about my age and vulnerability. Charlotte and the children remained in their gated community, sending flowers and a professionally designed memorial video. I understood the precautions, of course, but understanding didn't ease the loneliness of those first months without Thomas. I wandered our house like a ghost, touching his things, wearing his sweaters, sometimes talking to him as if he might answer. The silence that followed my words was deafening. Gradually, painfully, I found ways to keep moving forward. I volunteered to deliver meals to homebound seniors even more isolated than myself. I joined a virtual grief support group where I found comfort in the shared experiences of others who understood the particular ache of losing a lifelong partner. I planted a garden in Thomas's memory, filling it with all his favorite flowers, dahlias, hydrangeas, and the bright zinnias that bloomed from early summer until the first frost. As the world slowly reopened, I established new routines: Tuesday mornings at the community center for watercolor class, Thursday afternoons volunteering at the elementary school's reading program, Sunday dinners with my brother George and his wife, who lived across town. I made new friends, Harriet from my painting class, whose forthright humor reminded me of my mother, Philip, a retired English professor who shared my love of mystery novels, Maria and her husband Carlos, who ran the community garden and taught me how to properly compost. The hole in my heart where Thomas had been would never completely heal, but I was learning to live around it, to carry my grief as part of me rather than allowing it to consume me. I was keeping my promise to him, one day at a time. Victor and his family remained distant after Thomas's death, though we spoke on video calls every few weeks. The children were growing so quickly, developing interests and personalities that I glimpsed only in fragments. Lily's emerging talent for ballet, Noah's obsession with dinosaurs. I sent birthday gifts and holiday packages, carefully chosen, books, hand-knitted scarves, and small watercolor paintings I had created in my Tuesday morning class. These tangible expressions of love traveled across the distance between us, carrying messages my words could no longer seem to convey. When the invitation came to spend Christmas with them in 2021, I was overjoyed. It would be my first holiday without Thomas, and the thought of spending it with family rather than alone was a gift beyond measure. I prepared for weeks, shopping, for presents, baking Thomas's famous shortbread cookies from his grandmother's recipe, even buying a new dress for the occasion. The visit was not what I had hoped. Their home, while undeniably beautiful, felt like a showplace rather than a sanctuary. The children's toys were confined to a specially designated playroom. The kitchen gleamed with appliances that were never used, and they had a personal chef prepare most meals. Conversation revolved around investments, property values, and the achievements of people I'd never met. "Grandma, why don't you have someone clean your house?" Lily asked one afternoon, watching me wash dishes by hand after lunch. "Mom says it's inefficient to do housework yourself when your time could be better spent on self-improvement." "I find washing dishes rather meditative," I replied, smiling at my granddaughter's serious expression. "And it gives me time to think about nice memories, like when your daddy was little and would help me dry the plates." "Dad did chores?" Noah looked up from his tablet with genuine surprise. "Oh, yes," I laughed. "He was my best little helper. He used to stand on a stool right about where you're sitting now." For a moment, a connection flickered between us, a shared image of Victor as a small boy, so different from the polished attorney they knew. Then Charlotte called the children to their scheduled piano lesson, and the moment dissolved like morning mist in sunshine. That evening, as Victor and Charlotte entertained colleagues in their formal dining room, I sat alone in my guest room, missing Thomas with an intensity that took my breath away. "I'm trying," I whispered to his memory. "I'm trying to find my place in their world, but I'm not sure there is one." I returned home with a mixture of gratitude and relief. The visit had confirmed what I already suspected. Victor's life had moved in a direction that had little room for the values and traditions that had shaped our family. It wasn't that he didn't love me, it was that he had constructed a narrative of success that required distancing himself from his modest beginnings. In the years that followed, our contact continued to dwindle. Video calls became voice calls, which became text messages and occasional emails. The grandchildren's visits, once highlights of my summer, were replaced by coding camps and language immersion programs. When I suggested coming to stay with them, for a week, there was always some reason it wasn't convenient. Renovations, business trips, the children's packed schedules. I filled my days with meaningful activities and cultivated deeper relationships with friends who had become like family. I took classes at the community college, discovering a talent for watercolor painting that surprised and delighted me. I traveled a little, a weekend in New York with George and his wife, a guided tour of the Grand Canyon with my watercolor group, a Caribbean cruise with Harriet and some other friends from the senior center. It wasn't the life I had imagined for my 70th year, but it was rich and full in its own way. I missed Thomas every day, but I also found joy in the independence I'd never expected to have. I painted my kitchen a bold terracotta color that Thomas would have found too dramatic. I adopted a cat from the shelter despite having always been a dog person during our marriage. I rearranged furniture on a whim and ate ice cream for breakfast, occasionally because there was no one to tell me I shouldn't. Still, when holidays approached, the absence of family felt especially acute. I had created new traditions: Thanksgiving potluck with my grief support group, Christmas Eve dinner with George and his growing brood of grandchildren and great-grandchildren. But there remained a Victor-shaped hole in these gatherings, a space where my son and his children should have been. So when Victor's name appeared on my caller ID 3 weeks before Christmas, my heart lifted with hope. Perhaps this year would be different. Perhaps, finally, we would find our way back to each other across the gulf that had widened between us. "Hi, Mom." His voice sounded tight, formal. Not a good sign. "How are you doing?" "I'm well," I replied, keeping my tone light. "Just finished putting up the tree. I used all the old ornaments this year, including those popsicle stick frames you made in elementary school." "That's nice." He cleared his throat. "Listen, Mom, Charlotte wants to talk to you about Christmas. I'll put her on." Before I could respond, there was a shuffling sound, and Charlotte's crisp voice came through the line. "Ruth, hi, it's Charlotte." "Hello, Charlotte. How are you?" "Very busy, as always. The children's schedules are absolutely packed this season. Lily made the competitive dance team, and Noah is doing robotics club plus advanced math tutoring." "That's wonderful," I said, genuinely pleased to hear about their activities. "They're certainly accomplished kids." "Yes, well, we believe in maximizing potential." Her voice took on a brisker tone. "About Christmas, Victor and I have been discussing arrangements." My heart lifted. Finally, the invitation I'd been hoping for. I'd be happy to bring something. My cranberry chutney, perhaps, or I could make Thomas's shortbread cookies. The children used to love them. There was a pause, a small intake of breath. "Actually, Ruth, we've been thinking about the holiday arrangements. The thing is, we're hosting some of Victor's colleagues from work, people who could really help his path to senior partner. We need to make a good impression." "I understand, dear," I said. "Should I wear something special? I have that blue dress from George's daughter's wedding." "Actually," Charlotte cut in, "we think it's best if you skip Christmas dinner at our house this year. The dining room will be at capacity, and honestly, your hearing problems make conversation awkward for everyone." She paused, then added with false brightness, "Maybe you could have a nice quiet day at home. Watch the parade on TV." The words hit me like a physical blow, knocking the air from my lungs. For a moment, I couldn't speak, couldn't process what I was hearing. Uninvited, unwelcome, an inconvenience to be managed rather than family to be embraced. The silence stretched between us. I wanted to protest, to remind her that these holidays weren't just gatherings, but the threads that held our family's tapestry together. Instead, I heard myself say, "I see. Well, you do what you think is best." "Wonderful," Charlotte said, sounding relieved. "I knew you'd understand." "Oh, and the children will be quite busy with school activities, so maybe hold off on calling them for a bit," They're under so much pressure these days. Not just excluded from the holiday then, but effectively cut off from my grandchildren as, well, the completeness of the rejection was stunning in its casual cruelty. Is Victor there? I asked, my voice sounding distant to my own ears. I'd like to speak with him. He had to step into another call, Charlotte replied smoothly. Client emergency that couldn't wait. I'll tell him you understand about Christmas. Yes, do that, I said, a strange calm settling over me. Tell him I understand perfectly. After we hung up, I sat at my kitchen table for a long time, watching. The afternoon light fade to dusk. The house that had once bustled with life and laughter felt suddenly empty, hollow. Was this what the rest of my days would be? Quiet afternoons blending into silent evenings, waiting for phone calls that never came? Gradually being erased from my own family's story? I made myself a cup of tea, mechanically following the ritual, filling the kettle, selecting a bag of Earl Grey, Thomas's favorite, warming the pot, waiting for the proper steeping time. The familiar actions anchored me somewhat, though my hands trembled slightly as I poured. Murph, my orange tabby, jumped onto the table, something he knew was technically not allowed, but that I often permitted when we were alone. He butted his head against my hand, purring loudly as if sensing my distress. Well, Murph, I said, scratching behind his ears, it seems it's just you and me for Christmas this year. The words, spoken aloud, made the reality sink in more deeply. Just me, alone on the holiday that had always been about family, about gratitude, about coming together across distances and differences to celebrate our connections. Now deemed too boring, too inconvenient, too old-fashioned to include in the sleek, impressive gathering my son and his wife were planning. Not family enough. For a family holiday. The hurt was profound, cutting to the very core of my identity. Who was I if not the mother, the grandmother, the keeper of traditions and connections? What was my place in the world if not alongside the people I had loved and nurtured across decades? I must have sat there for hours, my tea growing cold. Murphy, eventually abandoning me for his food bowl. The darkness outside deepening until the kitchen window reflected nothing but my own solitary figure at the table. When I finally rose, my body stiff from sitting too long, I moved through the house like a sleepwalker, touching familiar objects as if to reassure myself of their solidity, the mantel clock Thomas had inherited from his father, the quilt my mother had made for our wedding, the wall of family photographs chronicling birthdays, graduations, vacations, moments when we had been truly together, truly connected. I paused before the portrait taken on our 40th anniversary. Thomas and I standing beneath the oak tree in the backyard, his arm around my waist, both of us smiling with the easy confidence of people who knew their place in each other's hearts. What would you do, Thomas? I whispered to his image. How would you handle this? Of course, there was no answer. Just the ticking of the mantel clock, the distant sound of a car passing on the street, the soft padding of Murph returning to wind around my ankles. That night, I couldn't sleep. I paced my living room until dawn, looking at the photographs that chronicled my life. Thomas and I on our wedding day, Victor taking his first steps, family vacations, graduations, celebrations. A lifetime of love and sacrifice and joy. And now, at 70, I was being told I was no longer needed, no longer wanted. As the first light of dawn crept through my curtains, something shifted inside me. A quiet voice that sounded remarkably like Thomas's whispered in my heart, "Ruthie, you've never been one to give up. Don't start now." I stood at the window, watching the neighborhood slowly come to life. Mr. Peterson retrieving his newspaper from the driveway, Mrs. Lindholm's lights coming on in her kitchen, a jogger passing with a golden retriever trotting happily beside her. Life continuing in its ordinary patterns while mine seemed suddenly adrift. But was it really? Was I really so powerless, so dependent on Victor and Charlotte's approval for my happiness? Hadn't I built a rich life for myself in the years since Thomas's death, filled with meaningful activities and genuine connections? I thought of Harriet from my painting class, with her infectious laugh and no-nonsense wisdom. Philip from the library book club, whose insights into literature had opened new worlds for me. Maria and Carlos, who had welcomed me into their gardening community with open arms. My brother George and his wife Helen, who called every Sunday without fail. Perhaps being excluded from Victor's Christmas table wasn't the end of something, but an opportunity to create something new. Something authentically mine. The idea came, to me suddenly, fully formed, as I stood watching the sunrise paint my garden with golden light. If I couldn't join their Christmas celebration, I would create my own. Not a sad, solitary meal in front of the television, but a true gathering, a coming together of the people who had become my chosen family, who appreciated me, not despite my age and quirks, but because of them. The more I considered it, the more right it felt. My house on Cedar Lane had always been a place of welcome, of comfort, of connection. That didn't need to end just because my son had chosen a different path. Would host Christmas dinner, not as a replacement for what I had lost, but as an affirmation of what I had found. Not in competition with Victor and Charlotte's elegant affair, but as a genuine expression of gratitude for the unexpected gifts life had brought me, even in the midst of loss. The tension that had gripped me since Charlotte's call began to ease, replaced by a sense of purpose and, surprisingly, a flicker of excitement. I hadn't hosted a large gathering since before Thomas's death. The prospect was both daunting and exhilarating. I would need to plan carefully, the menu, the guest list, the preparations. But first, I needed my morning coffee. Life-changing decisions were best contemplated with caffeine, as Thomas used to say. As I measured coffee grounds into the filter, I felt a lightness I hadn't expected. Whatever came next, whether my impromptu Christmas dinner was a success or a disaster, whether Victor ever recognized what he had cast aside or continued down his separate path, I would face it on my own terms. Not as someone discarded, but as someone choosing a new way forward. That was the gift hidden within Charlotte's cruel words. The push I needed to stop waiting for permission to matter, to stop making my happiness contingent on others' approval. At 70 years old, it was well past time to fully claim my own life. I carried my coffee to the back porch, settling into the wicker chair that offered the best view of my garden. The late autumn landscape was spare but beautiful, dried hydrangea, blossoms in deep bronze, ornamental grasses catching the morning light, a few stubborn roses still blooming against the odds. Like me, I thought with a small smile. Still blooming, still reaching for the light, regardless of the season. The phone call from Charlotte had been like a stone thrown into still water, sending ripples through every aspect of my carefully constructed life. For 3 days afterward, I moved through my routine in a fog of hurt and disbelief, going through the motions but feeling strangely disconnected from everything around me. I attended my watercolor class but couldn't focus, the colors bleeding together on the page in ways I hadn't intended. Philip noticed immediately, pausing beside my easel with a concerned frown. "Everything all right, Ruth? This doesn't look like your usual work." I forced a smile. "Just experimenting with a looser style today." He didn't believe me, I could tell, by the way his eyebrows drew together. But he was kind enough not to press the issue in front of the others. Instead, he squeezed my shoulder gently and moved on to the next student, leaving me to stare at the chaotic mess of pigment that somehow perfectly reflected my inner state. At home, I found myself avoiding certain rooms: the dining room where we'd hosted so many family Christmases, the guest bedroom where I'd already set out fresh towels in anticipation of a visit from the grandchildren. Even my garden, usually my sanctuary, offered little comfort. The holly bushes I'd pruned with Christmas centerpieces in mind now seemed to mock my naive assumptions about family and belonging. Murph followed me from room to room, uncharacteristically attentive, as if sensing my distress. Animals have a way of knowing, don't they? A wisdom that doesn't require words. On the third night after the call, I found myself standing in front of my closet, staring at the blue dress I'd mentioned to Charlotte, the one I'd thought might be appropriate for her elegant Christmas gathering. It was a lovely thing, silk and chiffon in a shade that matched my eyes, with delicate beading at the neckline. George had insisted I buy it for his daughter's wedding, despite my protests about the expense. "You deserve beautiful things, Ruthie," he'd said firmly. "Thomas would want you to have them." I ran my fingers over the cool fabric, remembering how it had felt to wear something so fine, to receive compliments and admiring glances, to feel, however briefly, that I still belonged in the world of celebration and connection, rather than the margins to which age and widowhood had gradually relegated me. With sudden decision, I took the dress from its hanger and laid it carefully on my bed. Then I began to pull other items from my closet and dresser, my good pearl earrings, the silk scarf Thomas had given me for our 30th anniversary, shoes I'd been saving for special occasions that rarely materialized. I spread these treasures across my bedspread, creating a kind of inventory of beauty that I'd been holding in reserve, waiting for permission to enjoy. How foolish. How wasteful. Life was too short and too precious to save the best parts for someday. "No more waiting," I said aloud, startling Murph from his position on my pillow. "No more making myself small to fit into spaces others design. For me." That night, for the first time since the call, I slept deeply and without interruption. When I woke the next morning, the fog of hurt had lifted, replaced by a clarity and resolve that felt both new and familiar. New in its focus, familiar, because it connected me to the woman I had been before grief and exclusion had diminished my sense of agency. Over breakfast, I made my first list: guests for my Christmas gathering, Harriet from my grief group, Philip from the library book club, Maria and Carlos from the community garden, Mrs. Lindholm from next door, the Changs from across the street with their 2 children, George and Helen, of course, and Patricia and Robert from the grief group. Mr. Foster, if his arthritis was manageable that day, perhaps some of the other teachers from the elementary school where I volunteered. Looking at the names, I felt a surge of gratitude. These weren't just acquaintances or activities partners. These were people who saw me clearly, who valued what I offered, who had created space for me in their lives not out of obligation, but out of genuine connection. The second list was for the menu. If I was reclaiming Christmas, I would reclaim the foods that made the holiday meaningful to me. Roast duck, of course, though a smaller one than in years past. Thomas's bread pudding, my cranberry chutney, sweet potato souffle with the pecan topping, green beans with slivered almonds. Dinner, rolls from my mother's recipe, George's chocolate orange trifle, mince pies, a new tradition I'd established post-Thomas, mulled wine with cinnamon and cloves. As I wrote, memories surfaced. Victor as a small boy standing on a chair to help me mix the bread pudding batter, Thomas carefully turning the duck to ensure even browning, the grandchildren's faces lit with anticipation as the trifle was unveiled. The memories brought a pang, but not the paralyzing hurt of before. They were part of me, part of my story, regardless of Victor's choices. I didn't need to erase them to move forward. I just needed to create space for new memories alongside the old. The third list was for practical preparations. Deep clean the house, especially the dining room, launder and iron the good tablecloth, polish grandmother's silver, bring down the extra folding chairs from the attic, make sure there are enough plates, glasses, serving dishes, fresh flowers for the table, perhaps new candles for the centerpiece. With my lists complete, I felt a growing excitement. This wouldn't be a pale imitation of holidays past, or a consolation prize for being excluded from Victor's gathering. This would be something authentic, a true expression of what I valued and who I had become. I called Harriet first, not just because she topped my guest list, but because her no-nonsense support had become my touchstone in difficult moments. "Ruth, I was just thinking about you. How are things?" Her voice, slightly raspy from decades of cigarettes before she quit 10 years ago, was as warm and direct as ever. "I'm calling with an invitation," I said, surprised by the steadiness in my own voice. "I'm hosting Christmas dinner this year and would love for you to join me." There was a slight pause before she responded. "That sounds lovely, but I thought you usually went to Victor's for the holidays." I hadn't told anyone about Charlotte's call. Pride, perhaps, or a lingering hope that there had been some misunderstanding that would be corrected with time. But if I was truly embracing this new direction, honesty was essential. "Victor and Charlotte have other plans this year," I said, then added with a courage that surprised me. "Actually, Charlotte specifically uninvited me. Said the house would be too crowded and my hearing problems make conversation awkward for everyone." Harriet's outraged gasp was gratifying. "She didn't. That pretentious little—" She cut herself off. "I'm sorry, Ruth. That's absolutely awful." "It was," I agreed, "but it's also helped me realize something important. I've been waiting for permission to belong when I should have been creating spaces where I already do. So this Christmas will be about chosen family, people who value each other, and you're at the top of my list." "Oh, honey," Harriet's voice softened. "I would be honored, and I make a damn good pecan pie if I do say so myself." "Perfect. Dinner will be at 2, but come whenever you like. You know my door is always open." After Harriet, I called Philip, who accepted with such genuine pleasure that I felt a twinge of regret for not having invited him to anything social before. Then Maria and Carlos, who offered to bring both wine and their famous empanadas. Not traditional Christmas food, but trust us, everyone loves them. Then the Changs from across the street, who seemed momentarily flustered by the personal invitation before accepting with quiet enthusiasm. Each positive response buoyed my spirits further. By the time I called George, I was practically floating. "Christmas gathering at your house?" My brother sounded cautiously pleased. "What about Victor and the grandkids?" "They have other plans," I said, deciding to spare him the details for now. "But I'd really love for you and Helen to come. It wouldn't be the same without your chocolate orange trifle." George knew me too well to accept this simplified version. "Ruthie," he said gently, "what's really going on? You've been talking about seeing the grandchildren for Christmas for months." I sighed, sitting down at my kitchen table. "Victor and Charlotte are hosting some work colleagues. Apparently, there's no room for deaf old me and my awkward hearing aids." "What?" George's indignation was immediate and fierce. "They actually said that to you? Those ungrateful, entitled—" "It's all right," I interrupted, surprised to find that I meant it. I was hurt, of course. Still am, if I'm honest. But it's also shown me that I've been putting too many eggs in that particular basket. There are other people who value my company, who don't find my hearing aids awkward. I'd rather spend the holiday with them." George was quiet for a moment. When he spoke again, his voice was thick with emotion. "Ruth Wilson, you continually amaze me. Most people would be wallowing in self-pity right now." "Oh, I did that for 3 days," I admitted with a small laugh. But then I remembered something Thomas used to say when things went sideways. The best response to rejection is creating something better. "He was a wise man," George said softly. "And you're a remarkable woman. Of course we'll be there. Wild horses couldn't keep us away." By the end of the day, I had confirmations from nearly everyone on my list. Patricia from the grief group couldn't make it. She was visiting her daughter in Florida. But Robert accepted for himself and offered to bring his famous cranberry walnut bread. Not exactly traditional, he acknowledged. But Margaret always said holidays need something warm from the oven. The Changs were delighted by the invitation. "My parents always spoke so highly of your Christmas dinners," Susan said. "They'll be jealous when I tell them we're carrying on the tradition." Mrs. Lindholm accepted with the caveat that she might need assistance getting up and down our front steps. "These old knees aren't what they used to be," she said cheerfully, "but they'll carry me to good food and better company any day." Even two of the teachers from the elementary school, Jasmine, who taught first grade, and David, the music teacher, accepted my impromptu invitation with enthusiasm. "We usually just get takeout and watch holiday movies," Jasmine admitted. "A real Christmas dinner sounds magical." I had expected to feel relief at these acceptances, perhaps a quiet satisfaction at having salvaged something from the wreckage of my holiday plans. What I hadn't expected was the genuine joy that bubbled up with each conversation, the sense of purpose that energized me as I began making more detailed preparations. That evening, I pulled out my mother's recipe box, a weathered wooden container, filled with index cards in her elegant handwriting, supplemented over the years with my mother-in-law's recipes and my own additions. I sorted through them, selecting the ones that would form the foundation of our meal. For the first time in years, I found myself adapting and expanding these traditional recipes rather than following them to the letter. Why not add a touch of orange zest to the cranberry chutney? Perhaps a hint of cardamom in the bread pudding? These small innovations felt significant, markers of my willingness to blend the comfort of tradition with the excitement of new possibilities. I was so absorbed in my planning that I almost missed the text message from Victor. A brief note. "Hi, Mom. Charlotte mentioned she spoke with you about Christmas. Hope you're not too disappointed. We'll try to FaceTime with you after dinner if we're not too busy." The message was so casually dismissive that I actually laughed out loud, a sharp sound that startled Murph from his perch on the windowsill. An afterthought, a box to be checked off the list of familial obligations. Call Mom so she doesn't feel completely forgotten. As if a 5-minute video chat squeezed between dessert and digestives could compensate for exclusion from the gathering itself. I started several responses, deleting each one. What was there to say, really? That I wasn't disappointed but devastated? That a FaceTime call, if they weren't too busy, was salt in an already painful wound? That I had expected better from the boy I had raised to value family above all else? In the end, I simply wrote, "No need to worry about calling. I'll be hosting my own Christmas dinner and will be quite busy myself. Enjoy your gathering." I hesitated before pressing send, wondering if the message revealed too much of my hurt or would make Victor feel guilty. Then I remembered Charlotte's words, "Your hearing problems make conversation awkward for everyone," and hit the button with a sense of grim satisfaction. Let them wonder. Let them worry even about what their casual cruelty had set in motion. The next morning, I woke with a renewed sense of purpose. This wasn't just about salvaging a holiday or proving something to Victor and Charlotte. This was about reclaiming joy, about creating meaningful connection, about demonstrating to myself and others that my worth wasn't dependent on my son's recognition. I began with practical matters. The dining room table would seat 8 comfortably, but we would be more than that. I would need to set up the card table as an extension, covered with a tablecloth that matched the main table as closely as possible. Thomas had built a window seat along one wall of the dining room years ago. With cushions, it could accommodate some of the younger guests. The good china, a wedding gift from Thomas's parents, would need careful washing after years of disuse. I had enough matching plates for 10, but would need to supplement with the everyday dishes for additional guests. Maybe mixing patterns would actually look more interesting, more intentional, a celebration of diversity rather than the rigid conformity Charlotte seemed to value so highly. I spent the morning taking inventory of what I had and what I would need, serving platters, glassware, silverware, napkins. The process was both practical and deeply symbolic, a way of assessing my resources and acknowledging that they were more than sufficient. I didn't need to apologize for mismatched glasses or plates that weren't from a designer collection. What mattered was that there would be enough for everyone, that no one would go without. In the afternoon, I cleaned the dining room, a task I had been avoiding since Thomas's death. We had shared so many meals in this space, some joyous, some tense, all part of the tapestry of our marriage. Without him across from me, the room had felt too large, too empty, a reminder of absence rather than a space for nourishment. But as I dusted the china cabinet and polished the table to a warm glow, I found myself remembering not just Thomas, but the many others who had gathered. Here over the years, my parents during holiday visits, Victor's childhood friends, neighbors who had become like family. The room held all those connections, those threads of community that had sustained us through good times and bad. By the time I finished, the space felt different. Not just cleaner, but somehow more spacious, more welcoming. A setting ready to embrace new stories alongside the old ones. I stood in the doorway, hands on my hips, and nodded with satisfaction. This would work. This would be good. The next day was my watercolor class at the community college. I had considered skipping it with so much preparation still to do, but decided against it. This new path I was forging required balance, attention to practical needs, but also to the activities that nourished my spirit. In class, I found myself working with unusual focus and creativity. I had been making small landscape pieces for months, safe, pretty scenes that earned gentle praise from our instructor. Today, inspired by my holiday planning, I decided to attempt something more ambitious, a still life of winter fruits and evergreen branches, rich with color and texture. "This is beautiful work, Ruth," Philip commented, stopping to watch my progress. "There's a real sense of celebration in it." I looked up, surprised by the observation but recognizing its truth. There was celebration in this creation, in the knowledge that it would serve not just an aesthetic purpose but a communal one. This painting would hang in my dining room, witnessing the gathering I was creating. "Thank you," I replied, running my brush along the curve of a pomegranate. "I'm making it for a special occasion." As the days passed, my preparations expanded beyond the practical into the emotional and spiritual. I found myself reflecting more deeply on the meaning of gratitude, the purpose of gathering, the ways in which food and fellowship could heal wounds and bridge differences. I started a gratitude journal, recording each evening 3 things for which I was thankful. Some were significant: my health, my home, the friends who had become family. Others were small but precious: the perfect bloom of a winter camellia in my garden, the way sunlight filtered through frost-covered branches, the comforting weight of Murph curled against my side as I read. This practice gradually shifted my focus away from what I had lost: my husband, my expected place at my son's table, toward what remained and what was being created anew. The shift wasn't always easy or linear. There were still moments when grief or hurt would wash over me unexpectedly, when I would find myself reaching for the phone to call Victor before remembering the gulf between us. But increasingly, these moments were balanced by genuine anticipation for the gathering I was creating, by the warmth of connections that were deepening through my holiday preparations. Harriet stopped by with fabric samples for napkin rings she was crafting as her contribution. "I thought these winter colors would look nice on your table," she said, spreading out swatches in rich burgundy, deep gold, and forest green. "And everyone gets to take one home afterward, a little memento of our day together." Philip offered to come early on Christmas morning to help with any last-minute setup. "I'm an early riser anyway," he said with characteristic understatement. "Might as well make myself useful." Mrs. Lindholm appeared at my door one evening with a stack of Christmas records, vintage vinyl from the 1950s and 60s. "For background music," she explained, looking slightly embarrassed by her own thoughtfulness. "I thought it might add to, the atmosphere." "I think it sounds perfectly lovely," I assured her, touched by the gesture. Thomas and I used to dance to Christmas music in the living room after everyone had gone to bed. It would be nice to bring that tradition back in a new way. Even Carlos contributed, calling to offer the use of his grandmother's silver candelabra. They were my abuelas, he explained, and they deserved to be part of a proper celebration, rather than gathering dust in our china cabinet. These offerings, of time, of skills, of treasured possessions, reinforced what I was coming to understand more deeply with each passing day. That community isn't just about gathering in the same physical space, but about the mutual exchange of gifts, both tangible and intangible. Each person contributing what they uniquely have to offer, creating something greater than any individual could achieve alone. 1 week before Christmas, I received an unexpected text message from Lily, my granddaughter. "Hi, Grandma," Mom said. "You're not coming for Christmas this year. Are you sick?" The message caught me off guard. So Charlotte had presented my absence as my choice, perhaps even my failing. I shouldn't have been surprised, but the manipulation still stung. I considered my response carefully. I had no desire to put Lily in the middle of adult conflicts or to damage her relationship with her parents. But neither was I willing to perpetuate a falsehood that cast me as the one withdrawing from family connection. Finally, I wrote, "Not sick at all, sweetheart. Your parents are hosting important work colleagues and felt it would be better if I wasn't there this year. But I'm having a lovely Christmas gathering at my house with friends. I miss you and Noah very much and would love to see you soon. I hesitated before adding a final line. You and Noah are always welcome here. Always. I didn't expect a response, and I didn't receive one. But something about sending that message, acknowledging the truth simply and without bitterness, affirming my love and openness to connection, felt like another small step toward wholeness. 3 days before Christmas, Victor called. I was in the middle of grocery shopping, carefully selecting the ingredients for Thomas's bread pudding, when my phone rang. Seeing his name on the screen made my heart race in a way that felt uncomfortably familiar. The anticipation, the hope, the fear of disappointment that had characterized our relationship for too many years. I answered with deliberate casualness. "Hello, Victor. This is a surprise." "Hi, Mom." His voice sounded strained. I wanted to check in about Christmas. Lily mentioned texting with you." "Of course." He wasn't calling out of genuine concern, but because his daughter had revealed the discrepancy in narratives. I continued selecting dried fruit, testing each package for freshness as we spoke. "Yes," she asked if I was sick. Apparently, that's the explanation Charlotte gave for my absence. The silence on the other end lasted several seconds. When he spoke, again, Victor's voice had a defensive edge. It seemed simpler than trying to explain the whole situation. The situation being that I was uninvited because I'm deaf and inconvenient? Another silence, this one more uncomfortable. "Mom, it wasn't like that. Charlotte just thought—" "I know exactly what Charlotte thought," I interrupted, surprising myself with my firmness. "And I know that you allowed it. But that's not why I answered your call. If you're worried about what Lily thinks, you can tell her the truth or continue with your convenient fiction. That's your choice. But don't expect me to lie to her if she asks me directly. This is exactly why—" He stopped himself, took an audible breath. "Look, the point is, if you really want to join us, we can make it work. Charlotte says she might have been too hasty." The invitation, if it could even be called that, was so grudging, so clearly motivated by damage control rather than genuine desire for my presence, that I almost laughed. 6 months ago, I might have accepted it eagerly, grateful for any crumb of inclusion. Now it felt like an insult. "Thank you. But I've made other plans," I said, my voice steady. "I'm hosting my own Christmas dinner with friends who actually enjoy my company and don't find my hearing aids awkward. I wouldn't dream of canceling on them." "You're hosting?" He sounded genuinely surprised. At the house? By yourself? The implication that I was incapable of organizing a gathering without assistance might have hurt once. Now, it just confirmed how little he understood about my life, how completely he had bought into the narrative of the helpless, diminished mother in need of management. Yes, Victor. At my house, which I have maintained perfectly well since your father died, in case you hadn't noticed during your brief visits, with friends who have become like family to me, it's going to be lovely. I see. His voice had turned cool, professional, the tone he probably used when a business negotiation wasn't going his way. Well, I hope you enjoy your alternative celebration. I will, I assured him. And Victor, if you and Charlotte and the children would like to stop by for dessert around 7, you'd be welcome. Everyone else will still be there, but we could make room. It was an olive branch offered not from desperation, but from a position of newfound strength. I didn't expect him to accept, and I wouldn't be devastated if he declined. But it felt important to leave the door open, to demonstrate that my reclaiming of the holiday wasn't about retaliation, but about creating something authentic and inclusive. I'll mention it to Charlotte, he said after a pause, but we'll probably be tied up with our guests until quite late. Of course. The invitation stands regardless. I should go now. I have quite a lot of preparation to do. After we hung up, I stood in the grocery store parking lot for a moment, keys in hand, taking stock of the interaction and my response to it. There was still a tightness in my chest, an echo of old hurt. But alongside it was something new, a quiet pride in having spoken my truth without anger or self-pity, in having maintained boundaries without burning bridges. I drove home with my groceries and a growing sense that whatever happened on Christmas Day, whether Victor and his family appeared or not, whether every dish turned out perfectly, or some ended up overcooked or underseasoned, I had already achieved something significant. Had refused to be erased, I had claimed my right to create meaning and connection on my own terms. The house was quiet when I returned, but not empty. Murph greeted me at the door with his usual imperious meow, demanding dinner as if I had been gone for days rather than hours. As I put away the groceries and fed my impatient companion, I found myself looking around my kitchen with fresh eyes. This room had been the heart of our family home for decades. Here, Victor had done homework at the table while I prepared dinner. Here, Thomas and I had shared quiet conversations over late-night cups of tea. Here, I had taught my grandchildren to roll out cookie dough during their increasingly rare visits. But it wasn't just a repository of memories. It was a living space, still humming with possibility. The cookbooks lining the shelf included recent additions alongside my mother's well-worn collection. The refrigerator held ingredients for both traditional favorites and new recipes I was eager to try. The calendar on the wall was filled with activities and connections that had nothing to do with my identity as Victor's mother or Thomas's widow. I ran my hand along the counter, feeling a surge of gratitude for this house that had sheltered so much of my life, for my own resilience in finding ways to fill it with meaning even after devastating losses. Christmas was still 2 days away, but already I felt its true spirit stirring in my heart. Not the commercial version focused on perfect families and lavish gifts, but the deeper current of recognizing blessings amidst life's complexity, of finding reasons for gratitude even in seasons of challenge. That evening, as I finalized my preparations and checked my lists one more time, the phone rang again. I answered without checking the caller ID, expecting perhaps another question from one of my guests about what to bring. "Grandma?" The voice was hesitant, a bit lower than I remembered. "It's Noah." My heart squeezed with a complicated mixture of joy and caution. "Noah, how wonderful to hear your voice. How are you, sweetheart?" "I'm okay." There was a pause filled with the particular awkwardness of preteen boys trying to express feelings. I heard you're not coming for Christmas." "That's right, I said gently. "But I'm having my own gathering here." "Yeah, Lily told me." Another pause. "Dad said you invited us to come for dessert." "I did. You'd all be very welcome. Mom says we can't because we'll have important guests." His voice dropped to a near whisper. "But I don't even know those people, and they probably won't let me have any of your bread pudding." I smiled at the dramatic injustice in his tone, so characteristic of his age. "Well, if you can't come on Christmas, perhaps you could stop by the day after. I'll save a piece of bread pudding especially for you." "Really?" The hope in his voice made my throat tighten. "Dad has to work, but maybe Mom would drive me over. Or I could ride my bike. I'm allowed to go 5 miles now by myself." "That would be lovely," I said carefully, keeping my tone light despite the emotion welling up. "But check with your parents first, okay? I don't want you getting into any trouble." "Okay." I could almost hear him rolling his eyes. "Grandma?" "Yes, dear? I miss your stories." The words came out in a rush, as if he'd been holding them back. "They're not boring. I remember lots of them, like the one about Dad getting lost at the fair and the police officer buying him ice cream, and the one about when you and Grandpa went camping and the raccoons stole all your food." Tears pricked at my eyes. "I remember those too. And I have plenty more whenever you want to hear them." "Cool." A muffled sound in the background. Someone calling his name. "I gotta go. Dinner's ready, but maybe I'll see you after Christmas." "I hope so, sweetheart." "I love you. Love you too, Grandma." After we hung up, I sat at my kitchen table, letting the tears fall freely. Not tears of sadness or self-pity, but of a deep, complicated gratitude for this unexpected connection, for the reminder that bonds of love could persist through distance and misunderstanding, for the affirmation that my stories, my life, my experiences had value at least to this one precious boy. It wasn't everything. It didn't erase the hurt of Charlotte's words or Victor's acquiescence. It didn't guarantee any particular outcome for our fragmented family relationships. But it was something real and true, a light in the darkness, a reason to keep the door open even while establishing necessary boundaries. I wiped my eyes, took a deep breath, and returned to my preparations with renewed purpose. Whatever else this Christmas might bring, it had already offered a glimpse of what really mattered. Not perfect gatherings or unbroken traditions, but authentic connection, genuine appreciation, the courage to speak truth with love. And for that, I was truly thankful. Christmas morning arrived with pearly gray light filtering through my bedroom window. I'd been awake since dawn, my mind already mapping out the day ahead. For the first time in years, I felt a genuine excitement about the holiday, rather than the anxious anticipation that had become my norm when preparing to navigate Victor and Charlotte's carefully orchestrated gatherings. As I made my morning coffee, I glanced at the dining room. The table was already set with my grandmother's china and silver, supplemented by everyday plates where needed. Harriet's handmade napkin rings added warmth to the formal setting. The centerpiece of holly, pine branches, and red winter berries that Philip and I had arranged yesterday afternoon looked even better in morning light. "This is really happening," I said to Murph as he wound around my ankles, demanding breakfast. "And it's going to be wonderful." I had expected to feel nervous. After all, hosting a gathering of mostly new friends rather than family was unfamiliar territory. But instead, I felt calm and purposeful. Each task on my list seemed less like an obligation and more like an act of creation, of building something meaningful from the ashes of rejection. George arrived at 8 with fresh baked rolls and an unexpected gift. "A beautiful corsage of winter roses for the hostess," he said, pinning it to my sweater. "Mother always wore one for special occasions, remember?" The small gesture brought unexpected tears to my eyes. It wasn't just the beauty of the flowers, but the recognition they represented. an acknowledgement of my role as creator of this gathering, not just an invited guest or tolerated addition. "Perfect," I whispered, touching the soft petals. Philip appeared next, rolling up his sleeves to help with whatever was needed. "Just point me where you want me," he said, unexpectedly adept at kitchen tasks for a bachelor. "My late wife believed strongly that everyone who eats should know how to cook," he explained with a small smile. "Martha would approve of this gathering, Ruth. She always said Christmas should be about genuine gratitude, not obligatory appearances." By noon, the kitchen hummed with activity as dishes came together. The duck, golden and fragrant, bread pudding, studded with dried fruit and nuts, sweet potatoes topped with a maple pecan crust. The house filled with the familiar sense of Christmas, but my spirit felt lighter than it had in years. Each arriving guest brought not just their promised dish, but some additional contribution. Flowers from the Chang's greenhouse, homemade. Chocolates from Mrs. Lindholm, artisanal cheeses from Jasmine and David. Each offering was presented not from obligation, but as a gift, an expression of genuine pleasure in being included. What struck me most was the absence of tension that had increasingly characterized family gatherings in recent years. There were no undercurrents of judgment, no carefully maintained facades. These people had no shared history of disappointments or unmet expectations. They were simply individuals who had chosen to spend their holiday together, bringing their authentic selves to the celebration. As 3 o'clock approached, we gathered around the table. I found myself standing at the head, suddenly overcome with emotion at the sight of these dear faces turned toward me with expectation and warmth. In past years, Thomas had always offered the Christmas blessing, and after his death, Victor had reluctantly taken on the role. Now, the moment was mine to shape. "Friends," I began, my voice steadier than expected, "I want to thank each of you for being here today. This gathering is different from any Christmas I've hosted before, but perhaps closer to the true spirit of the holiday than many that preceded it." I paused, looking at the varied faces around my table, young and old, different backgrounds and beliefs, each with their own story of loss and resilience, each having chosen to be present in this moment. Today, we come together not because of obligation or shared DNA, but because of something perhaps more meaningful, the conscious choice to create community, to share abundance, to recognize in each other the qualities worthy of gratitude. Harriet reached over to squeeze my hand, her eyes bright with unshed tears. Philip nodded slowly, his expression thoughtful and affirming. So as we share this meal, I invite each of you to carry that awareness, that you are valued and valuable, that your presence here matters, that this table is richer because you have brought yourselves to it, exactly as you are. I raised my glass, filled with sparkling cider. To chosen family, to new traditions, to the courage to begin again at any age. To chosen family, they echoed, glasses raised in a mosaic of crystal, ceramic, glass, a perfect metaphor for our varied but harmonious gathering. The meal that followed was everything I had hoped for and more. The food was delicious, of course, the duck moist and golden, the traditional sides mingling happily with newer additions like Maria and Carlos's, empanadas and David's spiced winter vegetable medley, but it was the conversation that truly nourished us, flowing easily from serious discussions of books and art to hilarious anecdotes from everyone's past holiday disasters. I found myself laughing more than I had in years, sharing stories I might once have censored for fear of boring my audience, listening with genuine interest to perspectives very different from my own. There was a freedom in this gathering that had been missing from family holidays for too long, the freedom to be fully present, fully authentic, without fear of judgment or rejection. As we finished the dessert course, George's chocolate orange, trifle, my bread pudding, and Harriet's pecan pie, the doorbell rang. The conversation paused as everyone looked toward the entryway. "Are you expecting anyone else?" George asked, eyebrows raised. I shook my head, already rising. Not specifically, but the invitation was open. My heartbeat quickened as I walked to the door, trying not to form expectations about who might be standing on the other side. It could be a neighbor stopping by with holiday wishes, or perhaps one of the guests' family members coming to join us for dessert. When I opened the door, the soft light of the winter afternoon illuminated 3 figures on my front porch. Noah, his eyes wide with uncertainty but his smile genuine. Lily, looking uncomfortable but determined, and behind them, a reluctant Victor. "Grandma," Noah said, stepping forward. "We came for bread pudding. Is that still okay?" For a moment, I couldn't speak past the lump in my throat. Then I opened my arms, and Noah stepped into them without hesitation, his gangly preteen frame still fitting against me in the way that had comforted us both since he was small. "More than okay," I assured him, reaching out to include Lily in the embrace. She came more hesitantly but didn't pull away, allowing herself to be gathered close for a brief moment before stepping back, with the self-consciousness of early adolescence. "Victor," I said, meeting my son's eyes over the children's heads. "This is a surprise." He shifted uncomfortably, hands in the pockets of his expensive coat. "The kids really wanted to come. They've been talking about your bread pudding all day." A brief pause, then a concession that clearly cost him something. "And I wanted to see how your gathering turned out." I could have pointed out that this was more than wanting to see how things turned out. It was, in fact, showing up uninvited at a dinner to which he and his wife had explicitly uninvited me. I could have made him squirm a bit more, could have savored the uncomfortable reversal of our positions. But looking at my son's face, the face I had loved since the moment the doctor placed him in my arms, I saw beyond the awkwardness and pride to something more vulnerable. He was here, after all, despite whatever it had cost him to break away from Charlotte's carefully orchestrated dinner, despite the implicit admission that he might have made a mistake. He had brought his children to my door. It wasn't everything, it wasn't a full reconciliation or a guarantee that our relationship would magically heal, but it was something, a step, an opening, a possibility. "Come in," I said, stepping back to make room for them to enter. "We're just finishing dessert. There's plenty to share." I led them into the dining room where the conversation had resumed in my absence. It paused again as my unexpected guests appeared, curious eyes taking in the newcomers. "Everyone, this is my son Victor and my grandchildren Lily and Noah. They've come for dessert." I kept my tone light, matter of fact, as if late arrivals were entirely expected and welcome. "Victor, kids, these are my friends." What followed could have been awkward. In many ways it was. Victor standing stiffly beside the table as I found additional chairs. The children's wide eyes taking in these strangers occupying what had once been a family-only space. My guests recalibrating their understanding of the situation with this new information. But awkwardness gave way to something else as Noah spotted the dessert plates and exclaimed with genuine enthusiasm, "Is that really your bread pudding, Grandma? The one with the cranberries and pecans?" "It is indeed," I confirmed, cutting generous slices for my grandchildren. "And George brought his chocolate orange trifle, the one your dad used to beg for when he was about your age." Victor's posture relaxed slightly at this reminder of his own childhood connection to these traditions. He accepted the plate I offered with a nod that contained the barest hint of a smile. "You used to hide the first piece for me," he remembered, his voice softer than it had been in years when speaking to me. "Under a napkin in the refrigerator, so I could have it for breakfast the next day." The small memory, shared in this setting, created a bridge between past and present, between the family relationships that had frayed and this new tapestry of connections being woven in my dining room. Conversation resumed, now including my grandchildren, who gradually lost their initial shyness as Harriet asked Lily about her dance performances and Carlos discovered a shared interest in dinosaurs with Noah. Victor remained quiet, observing rather than participating, but I noticed him listening intently to the stories being shared. perhaps seeing me through new eyes as others responded to aspects of my personality and history he had long since stopped noticing. As the evening progressed, the gathering naturally began to shift and disperse. Some guests moved to the living room with coffee, forming smaller conversation groups. Others helped clear the table and organize leftovers in the kitchen, the work becoming its own form of fellowship. The children gravitated toward the back porch, where the Chang's son was showing Noah a constellation-finding app on his phone. I found Victor in a quiet corner of the dining room, studying the photographs on my sideboard, family images spanning decades, including several of him at various ages. "You have a nice group of friends," he said without turning around, his voice carefully neutral. "They seem to really care about you." "They do," I agreed, standing beside him to look at the photographs. "Just as I care about them. That's how friendship works at its best." He was quiet for a moment, his finger tracing the frame of a photo, showing him at about 10, proudly holding up a model airplane we had built together. "I remember this day," he said softly. "You were so patient, helping me glue all those tiny pieces, even though I kept getting frustrated. I loved teaching you things," I said. "I was so proud of you, Victor. Not just of your accomplishments, but of your character, your creativity, your persistence." Victor's hand dropped from the photograph, his expression tightening. "I haven't been very creative or persistent in keeping our relationship strong. Lately, have I?" The question hung between us, honest in a way our conversations hadn't been for years. I could have brushed it aside with easy reassurance or wielded it as a weapon to deepen his guilt. Instead, I chose simple truth. "No," I said gently. "You haven't, and that has hurt more deeply than I can express. But I haven't given up on you, Victor, on us. I've just needed to stop making my happiness dependent on your approval or inclusion." He turned to face me fully then, his eyes so like Thomas's, filled with a complex mixture of emotions. "I don't know how we got here, Mom. When did everything get so complicated?" "Life does that," I said, thinking of all the turning points, the small choices and major events that had gradually shaped our current reality. But complications can be navigated with enough honesty and goodwill. We can find our way to something better, even if it's different from what came before. From the living room came the sound of laughter, Harriet's distinctive rasp, Philip's deeper chuckle, the higher notes of the younger guests. From the porch, the excited voices of the children discovering something in the night sky. The house was alive with connection, with the easy flow of people enjoying each other's company without pretense or performance. Victor listened to these sounds, his expression softening. "Your friends seem to appreciate your stories. Charlotte was wrong about that." "People appreciate authenticity," I said, choosing my words carefully. "When we share our experiences not to impress or dominate but to connect, to find common ground, to offer insight or humor, that's never boring to those with ears to hear." He nodded slowly, perhaps letting this perspective take root alongside the narratives that had been shaping his understanding of me, of family, of what constituted a worthwhile life. "The kids have been missing you," he admitted. "More than they let on, I think. Noah keeps bringing up things you taught him, stories you told him. Even Lily, though she'd never say it directly." "I've missed them too," I said simply. "And you, Victor. The distance between us has been one of the great sorrows of my later years." He didn't have an immediate response to that, but he didn't turn away either. We stood together in that quiet corner, surrounded by the evidence of our shared history, listening to the sounds of the present moment unfolding around us. Finally, he said, "I should get the kids home. Charlotte will be wondering where we are." I nodded, understanding the complexities he was navigating, the competing loyalties and expectations. "Of course. But Victor," he paused, looking at me questioningly, "this doesn't have to be a one-time visit. My door is always open to you and the children. Not just on holidays, not just when it's convenient. Always. Something in his face shifted, perhaps a recognition of the unconditional nature of that welcome, so different from the calculated social maneuvers that characterized his current world. I know, Mom, he said softly. I've always known that, even when I couldn't acknowledge it. It wasn't a promise of regular visits or repaired relationships. It wasn't an apology for past hurts or a guarantee against future ones. But it was an honest moment between us, a small clearing in the tangled underbrush of our complicated history, a place from which something new might grow, given time and care. We rejoined the others, Victor gathering his children with gentle reminders about tomorrow's plans. The children said goodbye to their new acquaintances with unexpected reluctance. At the door, Noah hugged me fiercely, whispering, "Best Christmas ever, Grandma. Can I really come back tomorrow?" "Absolutely," I assured him, smoothing his hair, with a grandmother's automatic gesture. "I'll save some of everything for you." Lily's hug was briefer but genuine, accompanied by a quietly sincere, "Thanks for the bread pudding, Grandma." It was way better than the catered desserts at home. Victor's farewell was more reserved, a slight embrace, a murmured thanks for including them. But as they walked down the front path to where their car waited at the curb, he turned back, raising his hand in a gesture that felt like more than just a casual wave goodbye. I watched until their taillights disappeared around the corner, then returned to my remaining guests with a heart both full and peaceful. The evening continued for another hour, the conversation growing quieter and more reflective as candles burned low, and the satisfaction of good food and better company settled over everyone. When the last guest had departed with leftovers carefully packaged and plans for future gatherings already taking shape, I returned to my dining room to survey the aftermath of our celebration. The table had been cleared, dishes washed, and put away by helpful hands. What remained were the small, pleasant signs of a gathering well enjoyed. The centerpiece with its candles burned down to stubs, a forgotten napkin under a chair, the lingering aromas of spice and laughter. I sat at the head of the table where I had offered that opening toast so many hours ago and let the quiet of the house settle around me. Murph appeared as if summoned by the stillness, jumping onto my lap with his customary assumption of welcome. "Well, old friend," I murmured, stroking his soft fur. "What did you make of our Christmas?" As I sat there in the peaceful aftermath, I found myself reflecting not just on the events of the day but on the journey that had brought me to this moment. From the initial hurt of Charlotte's rejection to the purposeful creation of an alternative celebration, from the gradual recognition of my own capacity for joy, independent of family approval, to the unexpected arrival of Victor and the children. Each step had required some combination of courage, resilience, and openness to new possibilities. The gathering hadn't been perfect. There had been moments of awkwardness, missed conversational cues, the inevitable small mishaps of any human endeavor. But measured against what truly mattered, the genuine connections formed and deepened, the laughter shared, the stories exchanged, the mutual recognition of each person's inherent worth, these imperfections faded to insignificance. And what? Of Victor? His appearance had been both surprising and deeply meaningful, a small crack in the wall of distance between us. I had no illusions that one evening would heal all the accumulated hurts and misunderstandings, would magically transform him back into the emotionally available son of my memories, or make Charlotte suddenly value my place in their family. But sometimes the most important journeys begin with the smallest steps. His willing presence at my table, his honest acknowledgement of the distance between us, his bringing the children to my door despite whatever opposition he might have faced. At home, these were not nothing. They were, perhaps, the tentative beginnings of a new chapter in our relationship, one based on mutual respect rather than obligation, on chosen connection rather than expected roles. As for me, I had discovered something profound about myself. Through this experience, That at 70 years old, I was still capable of growth, of creativity, of forging new connections and finding new sources of joy. That the end of one chapter, my role as the central figure in Victor's family holidays, didn't mean the end of my story. That I could be the author of my own experience, defining meaning and value for myself rather than accepting others' limiting narratives. This Christmas had become not just a meal or a gathering, but a declaration of sorts, a statement that I was still fully alive, still capable of creating beauty and connection, still worthy of respect and inclusion, not because of my relationship to anyone else, not because of past accomplishments or future utility, but simply because of who I was in myself in this present moment. Outside my dining room window, the night was clear and cold, stars visible above the silhouettes of bare tree branches. Inside, the warmth of the day's connections lingered, a different kind of light. I had set out to create a gathering that would salvage something from the wreckage of rejection. What I had found instead was something far more valuable, not a salvage operation but a new creation, not a substitute but an authentic expression of gratitude and community that stood entirely on its own merits. Noah would return tomorrow, eager, for leftovers and stories. My new friends had already made plans to meet again. Harriet and I for a museum exhibit next week, Maria and Carlos inviting several of us to their winter solstice celebration. Life would continue its complex unfolding, bringing new challenges and joys, expected and unexpected. But whatever came next, I would face it with the knowledge that I was not defined by others' perceptions or limitations, that I could create meaning and connection even from difficulty, that there were many forms of family, many ways to belong, many sources of joy available to those willing to recognize and embrace them. Charlotte had told me I couldn't attend their holiday dinner, her words carrying the clear message that I was unwelcome, inconvenient, less than valuable. But in that painful rejection, I had found an unexpected gift, the push I needed to reclaim my own agency, to create something authentic and meaningful on my own terms. And in the end, everyone had chosen to attend. My friends with their enthusiastic acceptance and genuine appreciation, Victor and the children with their unexpected appearance, even Murph with his companionable presence now as the day drew to its peaceful close. Not because I had manipulated or guilted them, not because of obligation or tradition or lack of alternatives, but because what I had created was worth choosing, worth celebrating, worth being part of. Because I was worth choosing, worth celebrating, worth being part of, exactly as I was at 70 years old, with all my stories and experiences and continuing capacity for growth. That, more than any perfectly roasted duck or flawlessly executed gathering, was the true gift of this Christmas. A recognition that would nourish me long after the leftovers were gone, sustaining me through whatever challenges and opportunities lay ahead. In the quiet darkness of my bedroom that night, I whispered a final thanks to Thomas, whose wisdom and love had helped shape me into the woman capable of this day's creation. Then I settled into sleep, at peace with my past, anchored in my present, and open to whatever the future might bring. My son's wife had told me I couldn't attend their holiday dinner, but in that moment of exclusion had been the seed of something far more meaningful than mere inclusion, a reminder that at any age, in any circumstance, we retain the power to create meaning, to forge connection, to choose joy. For that unexpected gift, I was truly, deeply grateful. The days after Christmas unfolded with an unexpected rhythm, different from the usual post-holiday lull that had characterized my life in recent years. Noah appeared at my door promptly at 11 the next morning, having ridden his bicycle the full 5 miles despite the winter chill, his cheeks flushed with cold and excitement. "I told Mom I'd be back by 4, he announced, unwrapping his scarf, as he stepped inside. "That gives us almost 5 hours. Can we have leftovers first, And then maybe you could show me how to make bread pudding? Dad says yours is better than any restaurant's. The casual mention of Victor discussing my cooking with his son caught me off guard, a small but significant indicator that perhaps our family ties weren't as severed as I'd feared. Of course, I replied, keeping my tone light. And afterward, I thought you might help me organize some old photographs. I found a box of pictures from when your father was about your age that I think you'd enjoy. We spent the afternoon in comfortable companionship, eating leftover duck and bread pudding at the kitchen table, measuring ingredients for a new batch that Noah could take home, sitting cross-legged on the living room floor surrounded by photographs that told the story of our family's earlier days. Noah was particularly fascinated by images of Victor as a gangly adolescent with an unfortunate haircut and braces. Dad looks so normal, he observed, studying a photo of Victor proudly displaying a science fair ribbon. Not like a lawyer, at all. He was normal, I confirmed, smiling at the memory. Brilliant but normal. He used to collect lizards in the backyard and keep them in terrariums he built himself. Your grandfather was constantly finding crickets he was breeding to feed them. Noah looked up, eyes wide. Dad never told me that. He acts like he's always been serious and perfect. Nobody's always perfect, sweetheart. We all go through phases of figuring out who we are. Even your father. Even me. As promised, Noah left at 4 with a container of bread pudding carefully wrapped and tucked into his backpack. Can I come back next week? He asked at the door, his expression hopeful, but cautious, as if expecting disappointment. My door is always open to you, I assured him. Call first so I know when to expect you, but you're welcome anytime. The following week brought a succession of small but meaningful connections. Lily texted to ask if she could interview me for a school project about family traditions. We're supposed to talk to the oldest person in our family, she explained when she arrived, her tablet loaded with questions. Mom suggested Aunt Claire, but she's only 58. You're way more interesting. Coming from a 13-year-old girl, this constituted high praise indeed. Philip invited me to join him for a chamber music concert at the community college. Harriet and I visited the new exhibition at the art museum, followed by lunch at a cafe she frequented. Their soup is mediocre, she confided as we studied the menu. But the people watching is superb. Maria and Carlos hosted their winter solstice gathering, where I was introduced to a wider circle of gardening enthusiasts who immediately invited me to join their seed exchange in February. Ruth's heirloom roses are magnificent, Carlos told the group, his arm around my shoulders. You should see what she's done with a north-facing garden that gets minimal sun. Even Mrs. Lindholm and I developed a new Sunday afternoon ritual of tea and vintage movies, working our way chronologically through her extensive collection of classic films. I've had no one to share these with since Harold passed, she confessed during a viewing of Roman Holiday. It's not the same, watching them alone. Each of these moments felt like a small stone added to a foundation I was building, creating a structure of connection and purpose that grew stronger with every deliberate choice to engage rather than withdraw, to offer myself authentically rather than waiting for permission to matter. Victor called twice, brief conversations that felt tentative but not cold. We spoke about the children, about his work, about the book Philip had recommended that I'd just finished reading. He didn't mention Charlotte, and I didn't ask. Some bridges would need more time to reconstruct. On New Year's Eve, I received an unexpected invitation. George and Helen were hosting their traditional gathering, but this year, they wanted to modify the guest list. Would you mind if we invited some of your Christmas dinner friends? George asked. Helen was quite taken with Harriet and Philip, and I'd like to get to know Carlos better. We're thinking of redoing our backyard this spring. I think that would be wonderful, I said, genuinely pleased by this merging of my past and present worlds. The kids want to come too, he added casually. Victor called yesterday to ask if they could join us. Apparently, Noah has been talking nonstop about your bread pudding lessons. Charlotte has some charity function, but Victor thought it would be good for him to bring the children. I felt a surge of emotion that was too complex to name. Joy and vindication, and a quiet sort of triumph, tinged with compassion for the subtle shifts my son was navigating in his own life. "I'd love to see them," I managed to say. George's gathering proved to be another revelation, my new friends blending seamlessly with family members who had known me for decades, conversations flowing across generational and social divides, laughter, bridging differences in background and perspective. Victor arrived with the children, bringing a bottle of champagne and an awkward but sincere embrace. "Happy New Year, Mom," he said, his voice warm in my ear. "I'm glad we're starting it together." As midnight approached, we all gathered on George's back deck despite the cold, wrapped in blankets and holding mugs of hot cider. Lily leaned against my side. Noah wedged himself between Victor and me. And around us stood the constellation of people who had chosen to welcome the new year in each other's company. "Any resolutions, Grandma?" Noah asked as we counted down the final minutes. I looked around at the faces illuminated by the strings of lights George had hung from the eaves. Some new to my life, some who had been there from the beginning, all now part of this mosaic of connection I was creating. "Just one," I said, "to keep building on what I've started. This new way of being in the world." "Is it very different?" Lily asked, her perceptiveness catching me by surprise. "Yes," I admitted, meeting Victor's gaze over her head. "It is. I'm not waiting anymore. For permission or invitation or approval. I'm creating the life I want to live, with people who choose to be part of it." Something shifted in Victor's expression. Recognition, perhaps, or respect. He nodded slightly, an acknowledgement of the change he was witnessing in me, possibly even in himself. As the countdown reached 0 and cheers erupted around us, I felt a profound sense of alignment, as if the various pieces of my life, long, held in uncomfortable tension, had finally settled into their proper places. Not perfect, not complete, but authentic and alive with possibility. The first weeks of January brought bitter cold and heavy snow, the kind of weather that often isolated older residents in our community. I found myself unexpectedly busy, coordinating, with Philip and Harriet to check on vulnerable neighbors, organizing a system to ensure everyone had necessary medications and groceries, hosting small gatherings for those who could safely navigate the icy sidewalks to reach my home. "You've become a regular community organizer," George observed when he stopped by with firewood and found me on the phone arranging transportation for Mrs. Lindholm's doctor appointment. "I've never seen you so energized in winter." "I've discovered I'm good at connecting people," I replied, realizing the truth of it as I spoke. "It's something I've always done, but I never recognized it as a skill until recently." One snowy afternoon, as I was preparing soup for a small group coming for dinner, my doorbell rang. I opened it to find Victor standing alone on my porch, snowflakes melting in his dark hair. "I was in the neighborhood for a client meeting," he explained, though we both knew his law office was on the other side of town. "I thought I'd stop by." I welcomed him in, taking his coat, offering coffee. We sat at the kitchen table where we had shared so many conversations over the years, the familiar setting somehow making it easier to bridge the distance between us. "I've been thinking about Christmas," he said finally, cradling his mug between his hands. "About what you created here, and why." I waited, giving him space to find his words. "Charlotte and I had an argument after we left your house," he continued. "She was upset that we'd gone against the plan, that I'd taken the kids without consulting her." He sighed. "But it made me realize something important. I've been letting her make decisions about our family relationships that should have been joint decisions, or at least ones where I advocated more strongly for what I know matters." "That sounds like a difficult realization," I said carefully. "It is. He looked up, meeting my eyes directly. But it also helped me see that I've been doing the same thing to you, making decisions about your place in our lives without really considering what was being lost. Taking the path of least resistance rather than standing up for the relationship we should have. The honest admission touched me deeply. Thank you for saying that, Victor. I'm not sure how to fix it all at once, he admitted. Charlotte's views on family are complicated. Her own parents were very difficult, but I want to try to rebuild something better with you, something that doesn't require you to be less than who you are to fit into our lives. I'd like that, I said simply, and I understand it may take time. Relationships aren't restored overnight. No, he agreed, but they don't restore themselves either. I'm beginning to see that they require deliberate choices, consistent effort. He smiled slightly. Something you've apparently figured out already, judging by all these new friendships you've developed. It's never too late to learn, I told him, returning his smile. Your father used to say that all the time, remember? I do. Victor glanced at his watch. I should go. Charlotte's expecting me home for dinner. But I wanted to ask, would it be all right if I brought the kids over this weekend? Maybe we could all do something together. I'd love that, I said, joy bubbling up unexpectedly. In fact, I'm planning to teach Noah how to make his grandfather's famous hot chocolate. Lily might enjoy that too. As I showed Victor to the door, he paused, looking around the entryway as if seeing me, with new eyes. You know, he said thoughtfully, when I was growing up, this house was always the place where everyone felt welcome, where there was always room for one more at the table. I'd forgotten that somehow, but being here at Christmas reminded me. It made me realize what I want my children to experience, what I want our family to be about. After he left, I stood at the window watching his car navigate the snowy street, thinking about the patterns we create and recreate in our lives, the values we carry forward or leave behind, the legacy we build not through grand gestures but through daily choices to connect, to include, to love without condition. In the months that followed, these themes continued to unfold in ways both expected and surprising. My circle of friends expanded further as Harriet introduced me to her book club, Philip invited me to a poetry reading, and Carlos persuaded me to help mentor young gardeners at the community plot. Lily began stopping by regularly after her dance classes, ostensibly to use my sewing machine for costume adjustments, but increasingly just to talk, to share her adolescent concerns in a space where she felt heard without judgment. Noah's visits remained steady, our cooking experiments growing more ambitious with each success. Victor made good on his promise to reconnect, joining us for occasional dinners, sometimes with the children, sometimes alone. Charlotte remained distant, but I noticed small shifts. A birthday card signed with her name alongside Victor's, a text message with a photo of Lily in her dance recital costume, a reluctant but not hostile nod when we encountered each other at a school event. Progress was not always linear. There were still misunderstandings, scheduling conflicts, moments when old wounds felt freshly painful. But beneath these surface disruptions, a fundamental change had taken root, in my expectations, in Victor's awareness, in our shared commitment, to finding a way forward that honored both our history and our present reality. 1 year after Charlotte's painful phone call, as I prepared to host another Christmas gathering, this one expanded to include both my chosen family and biological one, I found myself reflecting on the journey of the past 12 months. I had begun in hurt and rejection, moved through anger and determination, and arrived at a place of genuine abundance, not despite the painful exclusion that had catalyzed the process, but in some ways because of it. That moment of being told I was too inconvenient to include had forced me to confront questions I had been avoiding. Who was I beyond my family roles? What did I truly value? What kind of life did I want to create in my remaining years? The answers had led me to this new reality, A home still filled with warmth and welcome, but no longer dependent on any one person's approval. A heart still connected to family, but expanded to embrace a wider definition of belonging. A life still grounded in traditions, but flexible enough to incorporate change and growth. On Christmas Eve, as I put the finishing touches on the dining room table, now extended with not one but 2 additional tables to accommodate all who would gather the next day, the doorbell rang. I opened it to find Victor, Lily, and Noah standing on the porch, arms filled with packages. "We thought we'd help with some of the preparation," Victor explained, ushering the children inside. "Noah says he's now an expert at bread pudding, and Lily wants to learn how to make the cranberry chutney." "Wonderful," I exclaimed, genuinely delighted by their initiative. "But I thought you weren't coming until tomorrow." Victor exchanged glances with the children. "We have something to tell you, Mom. Charlotte's sister invited us to spend Christmas at their ski lodge in Vermont. It's apparently quite the event. Catered meals, professional decorations, the works." My heart sank slightly, anticipating the news that they would be missing our gathering after all. "That sounds lovely," I managed, keeping my smile in place. "We declined," Victor said simply. "All of us. Together." I looked at him in surprise, then at the children, who were nodding confirmation. "Dad said what you created last year was more special than any fancy party," Noah explained earnestly. "And I told Mom that I'd rather be somewhere that feels like a real Christmas, not a magazine photo shoot," Lily added with the brutally honest assessment of a teenager. "Charlotte's not entirely happy about it," Victor admitted, "but she's agreed to join us tomorrow for dinner. She says she's curious to see what all the fuss is about." I felt a surge of emotion, not triumph or vindication, but a quiet joy mixed with humility. The cycle of rejection and exclusion had been broken not through force or manipulation, but through the steady demonstration of a more genuine alternative. A space where people could be fully themselves and still fully belonged. "Well," I said, finding my voice, "we'd better make sure it's a dinner worth being curious about. Noah, you take charge of the bread pudding. Lily, I'll show you the secret to perfect cranberry chutney. Victor, your father always handled the table wine selection. Think? You can manage that?" As we moved together into the kitchen, I felt a profound sense of rightness, of completion. Not because everything was perfect. Charlotte's reluctance, the lingering awkwardness between Victor and some of my friends, the inevitable complications of merging different social circles, but because imperfection no longer threatened my sense of place or purpose. Had learned perhaps the most valuable lesson of my 70 years. That joy is not found in perfect circumstances or universal approval, but in the courage to create meaning even from rejection, to build connection even across difference, to choose love even when it isn't the easiest path. My son's wife had told me I couldn't attend their holiday dinner, and in that painful moment, I had felt erased, diminished, cast aside. But what had followed was not an ending, but a beginning. The start of a journey that had led me not back to my old place at someone else's table, but forward to a new understanding of my own capacity to create, to gather, to matter. As I watched, Victor showing Noah how to whip cream for the bread pudding, Lily carefully measuring spices for the chutney, I silently thanked Charlotte for the gift she had unknowingly given me. The push I needed to reclaim not just a holiday, but my entire sense of self, to discover at 70 that I was still capable of growth, of adventure, of profound connection. Tomorrow, my home would overflow with the beautiful chaos of chosen and biological family intermingling, different generations and backgrounds, finding common ground in shared food and conversation. There would be awkward moments and perfect ones, laughter and perhaps a few tensions, the complex reality of human connection in all its imperfect glory. And I would stand in the midst of it all, no longer the excluded elder seeking readmission to the family circle, but the creator of something new and meaningful, the architect of my own belonging. That night, As I turned out the lights and prepared for bed, I paused at the window overlooking my garden, now dormant under its blanket of snow but already holding within it the seeds of spring's renewal. I thought of Thomas, of how proud he would be of this evolution. I kept my promise. I whispered to his memory. I found joy again, just not in the way either of us expected. In the quiet darkness, I felt a deep peace settle over me. The peace that comes not from absence of conflict, but from alignment with one's truest self, from the knowledge that whatever challenges tomorrow might bring, I would face them as the author of my own story, the creator of my own celebration, the architect of my own joy. My son's wife had told me I couldn't attend their holiday dinner, but I had hosted my own instead, and in doing so, I had found my way home. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.